You're listening to the Adventurous Reinvention Podcast. I'm Allison Boyle, aka She Dreams of Alpine, and this is the show that's dedicated to all the adventurous spirits out there who have either been transformed by the outdoors or are interested in what it looks like to step into a new, adventurous, and courageous kind of identity in their life. It doesn't matter what your background is in the outdoors, what age you're starting at, or where you grew up. If you're curious about the outdoors and using adventure as a way to reinvent yourself, you're in the right place. I'll be sharing all kinds of personal adventure stories, lessons I've learned from the mountains, teaching what I know about the outdoors and leadership, and interviewing some amazing adventurous women all along the way. I've been coaching women on becoming safe, confident, and self-sufficient backpackers and leaders of their own adventurous lives since 2018, and I know exactly what big fears and self-doubts can pop up along the way. I have so much to share with you, so let's dive in. Okay, welcome to episode 10 of the Adventurous Reinvention Podcast. Today, I wanted to talk about a topic that I actually coach on a lot inside of our Backpacking Badass coaching program, and it's the concept of resistance. And resistance can show up in our backpacking goals and your outdoor goals all of the time. And it's one of the single most important things that you need to become aware of if you want to start going on more and more adventures. So let's start with defining resistance. What is resistance? And what should you be looking for, right? Resistance can show up all along the way to achieving your backpacking goal, but the specific instant that I want to talk to you more today on this episode is the resistance that you feel that shows up right before you're supposed to go on a trip, on a backpacking trip or a solo hiking trip or a solo camping trip or road trip. Anything that you have been planning extensively for maybe is a little bit outside of your comfort zone. For many of my clients, that's their first backpacking trip or a backpacking trip outside of their comfort zone or solo backpacking. So there is a resistance that can happen like right before you're supposed to go on your trip. So here's what happens. So many of you and my clients, they decide, yes, like this is my year. I'm going backpacking. They're super stoked. They're setting the goal and they're setting the intention and they're feeling all of the good things that come from going all in and being excited about like finally doing a thing they've been dreaming about doing. But what happens is there is usually a bit of time between when you set your goal, so that initial excitement, and then all of the learning that you need to do and your actual backpacking trip. So when you set the goal, there's quite a bit of time between your goal and actually realizing it and like it happening, right? So for some people, this can be months and months of preparing, depending on how new you are to backpacking or how much time you have to dedicate to your learning, what you need to learn for your first trip, or maybe it's just not the right season and so you're waiting a while, right? And like so many things in our life, you can start to lose that kind of initial excitement that you had when you first set the goal, that I can do anything I put my mind to mentality, which a lot of us have when we set a goal. We're very excited, we're very motivated. And as time goes on, you can start to feel a little less motivated. But usually, in my experience, working with hundreds and hundreds of women on, in particular, backpacking and getting out there and going on their first trips, the hardest phase for my clients is that 1 to 2 weeks out from their trip period and time frame. So many of my clients do pretty well with the kind of like goal setting, the learning and the preparing phase, and staying motivated enough to practice along the way. Like that part is usually pretty exciting for them. But when their backpacking trip is really close, this is when like all of the mind drama will start to come up for them. And I call this final hurdle before you even hit the trail. I like to call this the pre-trip resistance phase. So the pre-trip resistant phase, all of a sudden, you'll know you're in this phase is when all of a sudden there will be like a million excuses that come up the week before your trip, any trip that you have. But like, let's think of the example of a backpacking trip, why you shouldn't go. Like your brain is going to offer you a lot of reasons, right? Maybe you're behind on work. Maybe your kids are telling you they don't want you to go and you feel guilty. Maybe you feel tired from the work week. Or maybe you're really nervous and you're starting to like overthink everything and obsessively worrying about the worst case scenario. So a lot of my clients they'll be very prepared. They will have done the work all summer to get themselves prepared. But that week before is when you can start to kind of really panic and think and go down the doomsday kind of scenario for your trip, even though they're more than ready. You may start to even convince yourself. So this is kind of a sneaky one, but you may start to convince yourself that maybe you're not even that excited about it anymore. Like the excitement that you had when you set the goal that week before, 2 weeks before the trip, with everything else, all your anxieties, everything else going on in your life, it might convince you that you're not that excited about this goal anymore. And when you kind of hear those excuses in your brain, you hear that mind drama, it can seem super reasonable, like to have those thoughts, right? Well, maybe you are behind on your work. Maybe your kids really don't want you to go. Maybe you are actually really tired. Maybe you actually aren't that excited in that very moment, right? That week before, you're struggling to find the excitement. And especially if it's newer, something like this is newer to you, you don't really know what to expect. So it's hard to tap into like future self you being super excited, right? So it can be easy to convince yourself that maybe I should just not do it, right? But what you'll notice is these thoughts that you have that come up like the week or two before your trip, they always come up at the most inconvenient time for you to cross that finish line into your goal and achieve the trip that you've been planning and preparing for the whole time. So I want you to think about if this has ever happened to you. So think about a time that you've bailed on a trip or maybe got close to bailing because you just started thinking about all this stuff, all this resistance came up for you. And then I want you to pay attention to the next time that you plan a trip that's outside of your comfort zones and pay attention for this thing to happen. And I guarantee you that you'll notice, even if it's not that outside of your comfort zone, with almost any trip, just because it's not something that we do on a regular basis, you'll notice some forms of pre-trip resistance. This is that resistance. All of those thoughts that are coming up for you before a trip, this is mostly just mind drama. And it happens to me all the time. And I've been backpacking and rock climbing and mountaineering for like over 11 years now. And I experience this kind of pre-trip resistance really often, almost every single time that I have a big trip or I plan, sometimes it doesn't even have to be a big trip. It can just be something that I have planned a long time ago and then a couple weeks out, like I just have excuses. So I'll give you some examples. One example is Mount Shasta in 2018. So I went and did Mount Shasta in 2018 with one of my best friends. I was really stoked on doing that trip, climbing that 14er. I hadn't done it yet. It was something I was going to do with one of my best friends. And I was stoked on that trip until about the week before my trip. And then the week before my trip, I was telling myself all kinds of stories about like how I wasn't ready, how I wasn't in shape enough. Like I hadn't gotten to do the training that I wanted to do. I didn't feel prepared as well as I wanted to be, right? I started telling myself that I'm going to be the slowest in the group and hold everyone back. That's like a common story that I have had ever since I started getting into the outdoors. That I think a lot. My brain always offers it to me. I started thinking about how hard it was going to be. It was a more technical mountain than some of the stuff that I had done at that point. And, it did require technical skills. We were mountaineering. So I was kind of overthinking a lot of things. I had a really busy week before I went and did that trip, and I just wanted to relax. All of those things were coming up for me about the week before I was supposed to go out and do Mount Shasta. And I did want to bail, but I didn't. And I'm so glad I didn't. That was an incredible trip. We did summit Mount Shasta. I had a great adventure with my friend, and I definitely didn't regret doing it. But I had all of those stories. And another example I had is, I want to share this example because it's like, how do we balance pre-trip resistance with like actual things that may like come into play that are safety issues or are real issues that you want to address, right? So another example is when I was supposed to do the John Muir Trail in 2020. Michael and I had gotten permits to do the John Muir Trail in August of 2020. But there were a bunch of fires that were happening in the Eastern Sierras, as happens in that area in the summer. And some of my anxiety was real. So like some of my anxiety was about the fires, worrying about the smoke, wondering if they were going to get worse, if they were going to get better. But also my brain was going wild with stories of like what would happen beyond reasonable, like just going to super worst case scenarios. And I remember almost talking ourselves, like we had been preparing for months for this trip. So excited, preparing for months. Through hikes are bigger endeavors, so they take a lot more prep. And I remember like almost bailing like a week before the trip. But at this point in 2020, I have been hiking and backpacking for a long time and, have already started my business. I've been an outdoor educator. Like I know that this happens to me. I know what pre-trip resistance sounds like. And so I'm able to catch myself pretty quickly now. And I know that it's normal to like kind of go down that road, feel that resistance, feel like you don't want to do something. And I know that I have the tools that I need to like overcome that and take it day by day. So like with the John Muir Trail, yes, the fires were a safety concern that I did need to think through, but I had been prepared. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in a minute, but I had been prepared to kind of take it day by day and assess the safety as we go. So that is another example of my pre-trip resistance. And I'm really familiar with my own resistance now. It's really predictable, almost hilariously so. It's kind of like an old friend. It's like this old version of me that tries to worm its way back into my life. Old stories that I have. It's our brain just trying to like, keep us safe, and it doesn't like things that are unknown. So for me, I've learned to just show up regardless of my resistance in most scenarios, right? Sometimes there are real scenarios that I will make a decision not to do something because I'm like, this is not just pre-trip resistance. This is something real I need to take care of. But I've learned in most scenarios to show up regardless of my pre-trip resistance. Like I let myself have the mind drama. I let myself have the resistance, and I do it anyways because I know that I'm ready, and I know it's just my brain trying to keep me in my comfort zone. And the brain is a really sneaky thing. Our brains want us to stay in the comfort zone, stay in our comfort zone, so that anytime that we push ourselves out of our comfort zone, like our brains will start to throw a fit. So we don't experience as much of this mind drama when we are in the learning phase of our journey. So like, let's say you joined our Backpacking Badass program and you're still feeling pretty excited and you're not feeling that mind drama so intensely because like in that phase, you're kind of watching videos, you're practicing things at home, you're going on like hikes that maybe are more in your comfort zones. You're not experiencing that kind of pre-trip panic as deeply usually because you haven't yet risked anything, right? But going on an actual backpacking trip is going to make your brain freak out because it doesn't know how it plays out, especially if you're brand new. But even if you're not brand new, like I said, like I experience this pretty much all the time, the brain doesn't know how like your trip's gonna play out. And so it will usually offer you a lot of reasons to like back out. It's like, we should just back out because it doesn't like the unknown. So the important thing here is to remember that this resistance that you feel is really normal. It's a really normal human feeling to experience before your trip. And one quote that I always like to remind myself of before I head out to do anything outside of my comfort zone is that resistance is the tax you have to pay in order to achieve your dreams. So if you're doing something big, you set a big goal, expect that you will have that pre-trip resistance, that panic, all of those things. I can remember actually coaching a client really recently. She was about to do, one of her big goals this year was to do a solo backpacking trip, like a longer solo backpacking trip. And she was going to do the Trans-Catalina Trail. And she came on one of our coaching calls because we do like not weekly, but we do 3 coaching calls a month in our Backpacking Badass program. And she hopped on one of our calls and she was feeling the pre-trip resistance. And we were able to kind of like talk through it and be like, hey, like you're ready. I know you're ready. She's been doing a ton of trips. She's very skilled in what she's doing. The trail she's going on is a really well-maintained trail. It's great. It's perfect solo backpacking trip for her. She was ready. But it's just that pre-trip resistance that happens like every single time. And she actually just got back from that, had a very successful trip. She did it despite the pre-trip resistance. So we have to make it through the resistance and the mind drama and hit the trail regardless. And that is when the magic happens. I actually personally think a lot of times people think the hardest part about backpacking is like the actual backpacking, but I think the hardest part about backpacking is actually making it to the trailhead. And that is because of this resistance and the mind drama that can pop up right before a trip. And the thing is a lot of people just don't know how to identify it properly. So they have that pre-trip resistance and they think something has gone wrong and that they shouldn't do the backpacking trip. So they make it mean they shouldn't go. And that's what I want to encourage you not to do. I want you to, of course, like think through it, be like, is this a legitimate safety concern or not? And then make your decision going forward. And today I just wanted to share this concept with you so that you really can become and start to become more aware that this happens to almost everyone and it's probably going to happen to you again and again, and that nothing has gone wrong. And the magic happens when you choose to wade through that resistance and see your goal through the end. I want you to expect it. I want you to anticipate it. And I want you to prepare for it. So when you feel all of that resistance, those mind drama thoughts, like acknowledge it for what it is and show up for your goal anyways. Yes, it will feel uncomfortable. And yes, it will feel like you're going against, sometimes it will feel like you're going against what you want. Because like in the moment, you may not want to go on that backpacking trip, but you know that kind of aligned version of you, the version of you that set this goal in the first place does want to do it, right? Your current desires aren't in alignment with your desires to grow sometimes. So we have to like recognize that in the moment. So you got to persevere. And in my experience, you will be so thankful that you did. I have never regretted showing up for a trip, even if I had massive resistance going into it. We actually, we had a student in our Backpacking Badass community who posted about hiking Mount Shasta as well a while back, and how her guided trip was changed because of the weather. Like there were some weather window issues and the plan changed, and she started to question if she could handle it or not. It started to kind of like make her freak out because things were changing and it felt more unknown. And she was asking us if she should back out. And I recognized that resistance, but also just reminded her, I'm like, you're in good hands. She had signed up for a guided trip. I'm like, you're in good hands. You're with guides that know this mountain really well. They're going to be helping you through the safety calls, the pivots, the process, and that you should show up anyways. And even if it's a little different than the trip had been originally planned, there's so much that you're going to gain from that experience. And you might just like have an amazing time because you never know what your experience is going to be like in the mountains. And that it might kind of help her up level on like what's possible for her because she showed up and she was willing to show up. So now I'm sure like some of you might be asking yourselves, or like you want to ask me like, Allison, how do I differentiate between resistance, this pre-trip resistance that I'm talking about, and a real safety concern or a real readiness concern? And so let's just like quickly chat about that too. So at first, they might sound the same in your brain. Like I gave you an example of my thoughts being like, this is going to be dangerous. But my brain, I don't know, just pay attention to what yours does. We're all a little bit different. My brain says like, this is going to be dangerous anytime I do anything that's like not in my house watching Netflix. So anytime it's like remotely out of just being in my home, like lying horizontal on the couch, my brain is like, I don't know, is it going to be dangerous? Like it's always offering that to me. So what you really need to do is like ask yourself, like maybe get out a journal or whatever it is. Ask yourself if you really believe that. Do you really believe that's true for you? Get as honest with yourself as possible. And it's not just to the question like, is this going to be dangerous? Because like maybe there are elements of danger, but like, do we really feel like this is too dangerous to go on? Or whatever thought is coming up for you, like I'm really busy, like I don't want to do this. Get really deep on like, if this is really true for you, that aligned version of you. And you will likely know when you're panicking for no reason or if the concern you have is legitimate and either maybe you need to learn more or you need to do more research or whatever. So like in my example with the John Muir Trail that I mentioned earlier, I kind of want to come back to that. In that example, we did have a real safety concern, and that was wildfires. But when I got down to it, I was like, okay, I don't think just because there are wildfires that are existing in the Sierra Nevada mountains doesn't mean we can't go on our trip, because I knew that I was also really prepared for mitigating that concern on the trail and like still managing my safety when I was on the trail. Like I had prepared for that. I had a safety contact that was updating us constantly. I had my Garmin inReach Mini. We had a protocol for like how I was going to communicate. She was going to send us fire updates like every day. And also if anything concerning came up, she was going to send us to us whenever that came up. And we knew the trails backwards and forwards. Like I had done a lot of pre-trip planning and all the things. So there are a lot of pivot points and bail points on the John Muir Trail if we needed to bail for whatever reason, like a fire popped up. And we knew it wasn't like ego wouldn't be the reason we kept going if it became too unpredictable and unsafe. And all that was left was for me to trust myself with the plans that I had made, all the preparation in my entire life leading up to this moment, knowing that I'm a safe and confident backpacker, to trust myself that I could handle it, that I could make those calls when we were out there, and that we were doing our best and being as responsible as possible, right? So we ultimately decided to go and take it day by day. And with that example, actually we did reach a point in our trail. It was about 12 days in, because we were going to do the full John Muir Trail as 20 days or 22 days, I think is what we had planned in one shot. But we actually did one day. Michael and I were camping. It seemed a little bit smokier. And then my friend sent me an inReach Mini message, and I checked in on it, and she said, hey, there's a new fire that popped up, and it's right where you're headed to do your next resupply. And she told me some more information about it. And Michael and I, that night, we pulled out our maps, and we knew we were also coming across, like on our maps, we could see that there was a ranger station coming up. And so we decided, like looking at all of our options, it kind of was sounding like a really big fire and kind of really like it wasn't getting under control, and it was right where we were headed. So we were thinking already that we were probably going to have to bail. That was going to be our plan. And we were going to check in at the ranger station on our bail point out. So we decided to pick a point to leave. And I feel like that was Bishop. It was like around Bishop Pass. And there was a ranger station right around there. And as we were hiking out the next day, there were signs posted on the trail from the rangers that all hikers needed to leave. They were like shutting down the forest because the fire was too unpredictable. And they just wanted everyone to get off safely before it became a concern. So it was funny. We had actually known that we were going to do this before we even saw those signs, but that obviously confirmed it and reinforced it. And we were actually able to get, we weren't intending to bail at Bishop Pass, but because we had that inReach and we were doing that communication with my safety contact, she coordinated a pickup at the Bishop Pass trailhead for us with a trail shuttle guide that was out there. So we handled that so smoothly. And I'm so we got 12 amazing days on the John Muir Trail, and we ended up going back the next year and finishing it. So we hopped back on where we exited from the fires and finished it the next year. But I'm so happy that I didn't let that pre-trip resistance and anxiety prevent me from even starting and trying, because there's so much value too. So even if ultimately we did end up having to cut our John Muir Trail hike short that year, and that was sad, yes, because you do a lot of prep for a trail, and but it happens. And that experience was super valuable experience, and I actually got to take a lot of lessons from that trip and share a lot of those with my clients, and we got to create new resources for our clients. And how do you navigate this stuff? How do you create pivots? How do you make these decisions? How do you have conversations with your safety contact? All these beautiful things came out of that experience. And you will feel when you navigate these experiences on your own in the outdoors, so much more trust in yourself going forward. So this is how we build it. We got to go out there. We have to get experience, right? So ultimately, I'm just telling you to question your thoughts first. Before that you believe a thought is true, when you have that mind drama, when you're experiencing that pre-trip resistance, before you believe it's true, like question it. Because often this is just our brain in panic mode, right? And then a lot of our risk assessment can come before we even hit the trail. So like I said, what we had done with the John Muir Trail, like making a super solid trip plan and safety plan, knowing your trail forward and backwards, practicing all those key safety skill sets, knowing your possible escape routes if you need to bail, having a communication plan with your safety contact, utilizing things like Garmin and Reach Mini devices if you have them to keep tabs with your loved ones, to keep tabs with your safety contacts. These are all things that we do before we even hit the trail. And if you've done this pre-work, you'll know if your brain is just giving you mind drama or if you're truly not ready or prepared for a trail, right? And then when you've done that pre-work, when you hit the trail, you'll just be so much more at ease at making decisions on the fly because you are prepared. You know that when you come up to something that is too outside of your comfort zone, you won't be afraid to pivot. So another example of this is one time I did Onion Valley to Whitney Portal, and this was actually pretty early on in my backpacking journey. So maybe 2015 or 2016. I can't remember exactly at this moment. But I remember we were doing it early in the season. It was a particularly dry year in California. So it was June. Usually that place is pretty snowy still in June, but it wasn't that year. But there was one pass we had to go over, Forester Pass. It's at 13,000 feet that we were not sure what the snow conditions would be like and if it would feel too dangerous. And we did have people in our group that didn't have mountaineering experience like I had mountaineering experience. And so that is about halfway. It's at the halfway point from Onion Valley to Whitney Portal too. So it was a point-to-point hike. So we went into that knowing that that was a big question mark because we didn't have really any updated data on that area at the time. And our plan was if it felt too unsafe to go over that pass because of the snow, we were willing to just turn back around and go back the way we came. These are things that you can think about before you even hit the trail. And that's an example. So when you're not afraid to pivot, maybe you'll decide to camp at a different spot than you originally planned. Maybe you'll decide to do a shorter trip because you've learned to listen to your body through the training and you're already feeling tired. You can make these decisions when you're out there. Or maybe you'll decide to not summit a peak because it looks more technical than you expected, kind of in the Forester example that I've given, or the weather turns. I've definitely had many times that I've gone out to the mountains where we started heading up a peak and then we started seeing all these storm clouds go. And I'm I don't like to mess around with lightning. That freaks me out and it's unsafe. And usually I'm with a group and I've made safety calls to turn everyone around because we just want to be extra safe and cautious, right? You can learn to make these pivot and safety calls, and learning to pivot and make safety calls in the mountains is all part of being a safe, confident, and self-sufficient outdoor backpacker. But if you cannot make it past your mind drama and the pre-trip resistance, you will never get to practice this very, very important skill. So that is it for today. I just wanted to bring this concept into your awareness so that next time that, you experience this resistance before a trip, again, expect it about a week to 2 weeks out from your trip. Every time, almost every time, if you experience this, just know that that's what this is. Come back to this episode, listen to this if you need some encouragement. Save this one, right? Because this happens to all of us. And, if you're listening to this and you're feeling it's hard to distinguish between that, am I ready for this anxiety and fear that comes up before a trip and that pre-trip resistance, then I really, really recommend joining us in the Backpacking Badass program and community where you can learn how to distinguish between those pre-trip prep skills and the pre-trip panic. So that ultimately, you can get out there and start practicing and gaining some important experience on your adventures and obviously having a great time in the mountains. So I hope you enjoyed this episode, and If you have any questions about pre-trip resistance or want to talk through anything, you can find me on Instagram. I hope you have a lovely week, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye. Hey, I wanted to thank you real quick for tuning into the show and listening all the way to the end. If you love this episode and you want deeper support in becoming a safe, confident, and self-sufficient hiker and backpacker, then head over to shedreamsofalpine.com/waitlist to learn more about our Backpacking Badass coaching program, where I teach you absolutely everything you need to know to be self-reliant on the trails and stop waiting around on others for the adventure invite. So I'd love to help you more in your journey of stepping into your adventurous identity, and that program is the absolute best place for us to start working together. So again, that's shedreamsofalpine.com/waitlist, and you can learn all about it there. So that's it for today, folks. I hope you get to spend some time outside this week, and I'll be back very soon with a brand new episode. Bye.